everyone, so I am back with the second video of the video series on conservation of plants and animals class 8 science, and in this video we are going to discuss specifically about national parks, wildlife sanctuaries and biosphere reserves. So are we all ready to get started? Let's get started! Now the question is, when deforestation occurs, we saw that there are many harmful effects. So who are the main victims of deforestation? So when we cut down forests, so it definitely affects the entire environment. Now when the environment gets affected, all the living organisms get impacted, including human beings. But who are the primary victims of deforestation? Who are directly getting affected by deforestation? So forests are the primary target of deforestation. Now, nobody comes to your garden to cut down all the trees, right? Because your garden is just a small area. It will not make much difference cutting that much those plants. But if you cut down an entire forest, you get that entire stretch of big land. And that big piece of land can be used for many purposes, like for agriculture or for industry setup or for residential setup. So forests are the main targets of deforestation. So when we cut down trees in forests, who get affected primarily? Those who live in forests, that is plants and animals. So they are the primary victims because they are getting impacted directly. Like the impact for other human beings and other animals who are living outside the forest, the impact is indirect because cutting down forest will negatively impact the environment, and when the environment gets impacted, we also get impacted. So that is there, but that is like indirect impact. But the primary impact or the direct impact is on the plants and animals who are living in that forest. So what should we do? We should do something to protect these plants and animals. Yes, of course, we should do something. Because these plants and animals, when we cut down a big forest, so the bigger the forest is, the larger number of animals live in that forest. So if we are cutting down a very big forest, we are actually impacting larger number of plants and animals. Now the question is, what should we do? What can be done to protect these plants and animals present in the forest? That is why we are learning this chapter, that how can we save the plants and animals living in forests from the clutches of deforestation. So how exactly do we conserve biodiversity? So let us now see how can we conserve biodiversity. So here we are going to talk about the various methods and processes which can help us to protect plants and animals. So there are two approaches which are followed to conserve biodiversity. So one approach is in-situ conservation. What do we mean by in-situ? Situ is referred to site, in site. So that means at the same location. So that is in-situ. And the next approach is ex-situ. Ex means, in means internal, ex means external or exterior. So in situ will always mean on-site conservation. That means within the site. That means wherever the organism exists, in its natural habitat only we conserve the animal. So that is in situ conservation. And ex situ means off-site conservation. So we take out the animals from its natural habitat and then we protect it or conserve it in some other location. So that is ex situ or off-site conservation. So these are two techniques to conserve biodiversity. Now in each of these techniques, there are various methods by which different plants and animals are conserved. So let us first look at the in situ conservation. So how do we conserve animals on site? So this is on-site conservation, protecting an endangered species in its natural habitat. So that is why it is called on-site. That means where the animal naturally exists, we try to protect it there only. We do not relocate or we do not transfer the animals. Let them be there. We try to protect that entire area so that no harm is caused to the animals, no harm is caused to that particular area. So that particular area is called as a protected area. So this becomes a protected area. So there are lots of restrictions within this area, like human beings are not allowed to cut down the trees within that area. They are not allowed to hunt animals. They are not supposed to kill any sort of animals, whether it is a big animal or a small animal. So they are not supposed to hunt or poach animals. So there are a lot of restrictions within this protected area, and in that way we are able to protect the endangered species. What do we mean by endangered species? Those species which are decreasing in their number very fast. For example, if you talk about human beings, there are billions and billions of human beings existing on this earth. So the risk of human extinction is less because so many people are already existing, and a lot of them will reproduce and produce new human beings. So that means the chances of the species becoming lost forever is very less. But there are certain animals, for example, if you talk about the Bengal tiger, so the number of tigers are gradually decreasing. In fact, the number has decreased so much that in India, there are just a couple of tigers left over. So some handful of tigers left over, and the chances of protecting them is that those tigers reproduce and give birth to new ones. But once these handful of tigers are also gone, so it will become an extinct species. So we are not going to have them again. So these kind of species which are very fast reducing in number and are quite near to extinction, they are called endangered species. So especially for these kind of species, we try hard to protect and conserve them. So for that purpose, these areas are protected so that they can be protected against the predators. And not only protecting the animals from being eaten over or being attacked by some other animal, the entire habitat is also protected, so that the climate under which the organism lives is suitable for its survival. So if you talk about India, in India there are more than 600 protected areas which are present. Now what are these protected areas? In terms of protected areas, there are national parks, there are animal sanctuaries, there are biosphere reserves. So they are all examples where in situ conservation approach is being followed. So we will talk about each of these in detail a little later. So first let us try to understand what is ex situ conservation, that is off-site conservation. So in this case, the animal is translocated to some other place and not in its natural habitat. So we try to protect the species outside its natural habitat. So we take the animal out of that particular area where it naturally lives. So examples, one of the best example that you can relate to is the zoo. You would have seen there are so many animals which are present in cages in a zoo. So what happens in a zoo is not the natural habitat. It is just an artificial environment which has been created so that the animal gets the food it needs, but at the same time the animal is captivated, the animal is captured within a small area, and that's how the animal is made to survive. The animal is made to breed and give birth to new animals. So that's how they are being protected, but that is not their natural habitat. So that is called off-site or ex situ conservation. So examples are zoo for animals, botanical garden for plants. So if you have ever been to botanical garden, so you would have seen that there are many different unique varieties of plants present in a botanical garden. So that garden is also artificially maintained and appropriate conditions are being provided for the sustenance of each of those plants. Aquarium, so if you see an aquarium, it is quite a small thing, but appropriate environment is being provided so that the fishes are able to survive in that aquarium. In fact, there are many unique and different fishes which are present in the aquarium, and that's how they can survive. So these are some of the examples where ex situ conservation approach is followed. Now let us look at the various protected areas which are present in our country. Now there are many protected areas which are present in India. So what are those protected areas? One is the national parks. So what are national parks? How exactly do we manage the conservation there? That we will take up a little later. So first let us see what are the protected areas. One is national park, one is wildlife sanctuaries, and the third one is biosphere reserves. So these are the three main protected areas. Now you will be surprised to know that in India, somewhere around 1970, There were 5 national parks which existed. So in 1970, which is some 50 years back, so there were only 5 national parks which existed. But then later in 1972 came up the Wildlife Protection Act. So where more emphasis was given on protection of animals and plants. So after this Wildlife Protection Act, many more national parks were being created, and in 2012 it was found that there were 112 national parks in India. So 112 was a good number, and now we are in 2015, so maybe the count would have increased a little further. So you have more than 100 national parks in India itself. Some of the examples of national parks are Bandipur National Park in Karnataka. So you have Karnataka here. So you have Bandipur National Park in Karnataka. You also have Bannerghatta National Park in Karnataka. You have Bandhavgarh National Park in Madhya Pradesh here. You have Dudhwa National Park in Uttar Pradesh. You have Desert National Park in Rajasthan. You also have Gir National Park in Gujarat. Hazaribagh National Park in Jharkhand, and Jim Corbett National Park in Uttarakhand or Uttaranchal, whatever you call it. So you see, these were just few names or few examples of national parks. If you actually start naming all the 112 national parks, you will see that they are distributed throughout the country, in different parts of the country, starting from Jammu and Kashmir to Assam to Tamil Nadu, Kerala, everywhere you have national parks. So a good number of national parks are present in India. Now let us talk about the wildlife sanctuaries. So wildlife sanctuaries, they especially take care of the animals. They ensure that animals are being protected and they are staying in an environment which is their natural habitat. So it gives special protection to animals, and if you look at the number of animal sanctuaries which is present in India, it is approximately 515. So a huge number of wildlife sanctuaries are present in our country. Some of the examples are Rajgir Wildlife Sanctuary present in Bihar. So you have it here. So here you have wildlife sanctuary. Badarkhol Wildlife Sanctuary in Chhattisgarh, which is again, where is Chhattisgarh? It is here near MP. So here also you have this Badarkhol Wildlife Sanctuary. You have Salim Ali Bird Sanctuary, which is in Goa. So you have it here. Naina Devi, which is there in Himachal Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh is here. So here also you have wildlife sanctuary. You have Chilka Bird Sanctuary, which is very popular and of tourist interest and is present in Orissa. So similarly, like as I said, there are more than 500 wildlife sanctuaries. So it is not possible to name all of them, but yes, they are also distributed in different states of the country. Now, when you talk about biosphere reserves, they are comparatively larger than national parks or wildlife sanctuary. In fact, one biosphere reserve can include a few national parks or a few sanctuaries within it. So it is like at a larger level. So they are called biosphere reserves. So there are a total of 18 biosphere reserves which are present in India. So some of the examples of biosphere reserves are the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, which is present in Tamil Nadu. So in Tamil Nadu, you have the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So let me mark it as Biosphere Reserve. You have the Sundarbans Biosphere Reserve in West Bengal. So in West Bengal, you have Sundarbans Biosphere Reserve. So you would have heard of the Bengal tiger of Sundarbans, which is quite famous. You have Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve in Uttarakhand or Uttaranchal. So here you have Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve. You have Panchmari Biosphere Reserve in MP. So here you have Panchmari Biosphere Reserve. So each of these biosphere reserve may include other protected areas within it. Like Panchmari Biosphere Reserve might include Panchmari National Park. It might also include some other national parks within it. So Biosphere Reserve is a bigger thing than National Park or Wildlife Sanctuary. You have Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve in Andaman and Nicobar. So where do you have the Andaman and Nicobar? Here. This is the island. So here you have the Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve. So that ways you have there are a total of 18 biosphere reserves in India. So this is the count of the protected areas in India. So now we are going to talk about each of these protected areas. Now let us see how these protected areas help in conservation of biodiversity. Now, in each of these protected areas, whether it is national park or wildlife sanctuary or a biosphere reserve, in all of them, cultivation is strictly prohibited. So, you are not allowed to grow crops for cultivation purposes. So, that is not at all allowed. So, agriculture is not allowed in these areas. Grazing is not allowed, that is, animals cannot feed on. You cannot allow your animals or your bunch of cows to get in and then feed on the grasses there. So that is also not allowed. Deforestation is prohibited. You strictly cannot cut down a single tree within this area. So that the greenery is maintained, so that the environment in which the animals live, they do not get altered. So deforestation is also prohibited. Hunting is prohibited. Hunting or poaching animals, killing animals in any way is again not allowed. However, all these areas are open for human beings as a tourist place. For example, it is allowed for human beings to come to have a look at the various animals, to have a look at the environment in which the animals live. So they can come for an educational tour, or they can come to see the animals as a part of recreational activity. So all those things are allowed, but they do not have access to take the animals from there, or to hunt animals, or to cut down forests. So in any way they are not allowed to cause any harm to any of the plants or animals. And because of all these rules only, these protected areas remain protected, and that is how the animals and plants are conserved. So let us talk about national park. So here I have shown few pictures and I have taken them from Wikipedia to tell you how exactly national parks look like. So it is an area owned and protected by national government for conservation of plants and animals. Now since it is owned by national government, so they have been named as national park. However, they are also run by state governments as well. In these parks, visitors are allowed to enter, but the park will be protected from human exploitation. That is, visitors are not allowed to hunt animals, or they are not allowed to cut down trees. Now, you might ask that which park can be a national park. You would have often seen small park in your locality also, where you might be going for a morning walk, or where your kids might be going to play around. So, are those parks also national parks? Not really, because there are certain criteria which are required to evaluate a national park. For example, the minimum size of the park should be 1,000 hectares. So, the minimum size for a park to be declared as a national park should be 1,000 hectares, which is quite big. The park should also have sufficient budget and staff so that it can take care of so that they can maintain the cleanliness of the park, they can maintain the animals which are living in that park. Exploitation activities should be prohibited, so the park should have strict rules that exploitation of plants and animals are not allowed. So here on the screen you can see Manas National Park here, and this Manas National Park is in Assam. Again, here you see the Ranthambore National Park, and this is in Rajasthan. So if you see these parks, they have lot of greenery because the trees are not allowed to be cut down. So they are like a big area full of plants, animals, and they live in their own way. That is, they do not have to live in an artificial environment. So they live freely in their own way. They are safe enough because there is nobody to harm them, there is nobody to kill them. So that is how a national park is maintained. Next is a wildlife sanctuary. So this is an area which provides protection primarily to wildlife against hunting and predation. So that because a lot of animals get killed by hunting or by predation, that is some other animals come and then they eat up all these animals, and that's how they finish completely. So therefore these sanctuaries provide special protection to wild animals, and it is exclusively for wild animals. It also helps to protect the endangered species, that means species which are already lesser in number and they are on the verge of extinction. So their numbers are also closely monitored. For example, as I was telling, if you look at the Bengal tiger, so every year they will do some calculation and they'll closely observe the statistics for such animals which are just 3 or 4 in number in the entire country. So they closely monitor the numbers and see that how their number can be maintained, how those animals can give birth to new animals, and that's how their number can increase. So for that it is very important that those few animals are well protected and conserved. Now sometimes there are some wildlife sanctuaries which also act as rehabilitation center for animals. Now some animals which have fallen sick or which are injured or who have been abandoned. So these kind of animals are taken in by such rehabilitation center and then they are nursed. And once they become fine, then they are released back into the sanctuary. So that's how wildlife sanctuary works. So here you can see the picture which shows the Bhadra Wildlife Sanctuary. So here you can see a tiger. So here these animals, they again stay safe here. So you might be wondering, then more or less we are doing the same thing in a wildlife sanctuary and a national park. So I mean, how much of a difference is there between the two? So first, if you talk about the similarities, yes, both of these are working towards the same goal, and that is conservation of plants and animals. So biodiversity conservation is the goal of both national park as well as wildlife sanctuary. However, there are quite a few differences, because of which, I mean, you have to separate things. Otherwise, you would just have had one thing. So let us see how exactly a national park is different from a wildlife sanctuary. So if you talk about a wildlife sanctuary, here the ownership might be with the government, it might also be with a private person, or it might be with a private organization. So it depends. The ownership lies with whom. But in case of a national park, the ownership mostly lies with the government, whether the national government or the state government, but the ownership is with the government. In case of wildlife sanctuary, there is no physical boundary as such to restrict public access. So that means it is not surrounded by a boundary to say that, okay, this is this particular wildlife sanctuary. So you don't have anything like boundary. So that means people can enter into it because from some or the other way. However, here also there are restrictions for human exploitation. People are not allowed to kill animals. People are not allowed to cut down forests. So they are not allowed to cause any sort of harm to the animals. But since there is no physical boundary present, so sometimes people might enter into the sanctuary illegally. Whereas in case of national park, they have a defined boundary and public access is allowed only after approval. So what kind of approval? For example, if you visit a particular national park, say you are going to visit Bandipur National Park. So what will happen? You are just not allowed to enter into the national park. You need approval in the form of tickets. So you need to buy tickets. Once you get the tickets, you are allowed to enter into the national park. And then you go inside the national park and you will be taken in a vehicle, and then you visit the national park and you come back. So you were allowed to enter only after the approval. You are not supposed to enter without tickets. But in case of wildlife sanctuary, there is no defined boundary as such. So sometimes people might enter illegally. Wildlife sanctuaries' aim is primarily to protect animals, especially the endangered ones. National park protects animals as well as plants as well as historic objects. Now, what kind of historic objects? For example, if you look at many national parks, they have many historic evidences. For example, rock paintings or rock shelters. So these kind of things give evidences of the prehistoric human life in the jungles. So all those objects or all those evidences are also well protected, so that people can come and they can have a look at that. So they gain some knowledge about the history. Wildlife sanctuary is large, but national park is larger with more diversity. So here it is more diversified. So that's why if you see in India, the number of wildlife sanctuaries are more, but size-wise they are smaller. But national parks, they are quite larger, and since they are larger, so they can accommodate more variety of plants, animals. So that's how wildlife sanctuary and national park, they differ from each other. However, both of them aim towards conserving biodiversity. So let us now talk about biosphere reserves. Now, as I had mentioned before, that these are larger when compared to national park or wildlife sanctuaries. These are protected larger areas of natural habitat. So here on the picture you can see that the natural habitat of animals, a big area of land is protected. And again, here also you have the same restrictions like prohibition from hunting, poaching or deforestation. So all these things are not allowed in biosphere reserves as well. Now these are so big that they may include one or even more national parks and sanctuaries, and they provide protection to plants, wildlife, and also to human communities. Like you would have often seen that there are many tribal people who live within forest areas. So forest areas in the sense in a kind of biosphere reserve. So here these human communities are also allowed to inhabit in this region. So animals are protected and saved here. So they include other protected areas within it. Other protected areas could be national park or sanctuaries. So let us take one example. So here you can see Panchmari Valley, which is there in Madhya Pradesh. So in this Panchmari Valley, this is Panchmari Bioreserve. In Panchmari Bioreserve, the total area is very huge. So this is the total area, this much acres is the total area of Panchmari Bioreserve. So you can imagine how big it is. Now when we were talking about national park, I told that it has to be minimum 1,000 hectares. So now when you look at such a huge figure, you can imagine how big a biosphere reserve could be. And this Panchmari Bioreserve, it includes the Satpura National Park within it. So that is one thing within the Panchmari Bioreserve. It also includes Bori Wildlife Sanctuary. So Bori Sanctuary is also a part of it. And it also includes Panchmari Sanctuary. So Panchmari Sanctuary is also a part of it. So these three things are included inside the Panchmari Biosphere Reserve. So here you can see another example of a biosphere reserve in Uttaranchal, that is Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve. So these are like huge stretches of land inside which you have multiple national parks or sanctuaries, and even some small areas which are inhabited by tribal people. So now that we have discussed the various protected areas, let us talk about flora and fauna. What is flora and fauna? So the plants inhabiting a particular area is called flora, and the animals inhabiting a particular area is called fauna. So these are the two terms which are used for plants and animals. So how did these terms come into existence? So fauna is derived from a Latin word called faunus. So Faunus is a Roman goddess of earth and fertility. So from there, so many people say that it has been derived from that name of the Roman goddess Faunus. So fauna is for all the animals and flora is for all the plants. So these terms flora and fauna was coined by, the term was given by Linnaeus. So the same scientist who was also involved in the process of classification of plants and animals. So somewhere around 1745 these terms were coined, flora and fauna. So when you talk about one particular area, let us suppose I talk about a biosphere reserve, say Panchmari Biosphere Reserve. So the plants which are present in Panchmari Biosphere Reserve and the animals present there are called flora and fauna of Panchmari Biosphere Reserve. So that's how we use these terms. So let us take some examples. So every region, that is every protected area, whether it is a national park or a wildlife sanctuary, everything will have its own specific flora and fauna, because these national parks are located in different areas, and different areas have different climatic conditions. So the type of animals or plants which survive there are also different. So for instance, let us take the example of Ranthambore National Park, which is in Rajasthan. So if you talk about the flora and fauna of Ranthambore National Park, so talking about the flora, that is the plants which we see here. Some of the common plants which we see here is the wild date palm. So that is one plant. The peepal tree, the huge peepal tree, the banyan tree. So these big plants are often seen here. The ber, which we call ber in Hindi, it is the Indian jujube. So these type of plants are very common. So they form the flora of Ranthambore National Park. Talking about the fauna, what kind of animals do we see here? We see here tigers. It is quite famous for tigers. In fact, we also see some new varieties of cats like the leopard cat which looks like a leopard. We also see the jungle cat. We see sloth bear. We see jackals. So these are some of the animals which are very commonly seen in Ranthambore National Park, like crocodiles, python, spotted deer, nilgai. These are some of the very common fauna. So that's how we define flora and fauna of a particular area. Now, how does that benefit? Why do we want to know flora and fauna of a particular area? Because with that we are able to know that because there are some animals which are exclusively present in one area. So we get to know that, okay, these animals are present only in this area. So we need to give special attention to those animals, that they do not reduce in number. Because if they reduce in number and finally if they reduce to zero, there are no other places where the same animals are found. Therefore, it is very important to make a note of flora and fauna of various regions.
I hope you found the video useful, and if you really understood the concept well, do write in the comment section that concept hua crystal clear. And I will see you all very soon with a new topic and a new video. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.